Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I grew up in the FLDS community. It is a polygamous group run by Warren Jeffs, and I moved out when I was 18 years old.
I was raised LDS. Sam and I have been married for 9 years and have 2 awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. We want to quickly thank our donors and our YouTube members, as well as welcome anyone that would like to join our Patreon that we finally got set up.
Yes, we are very excited about that, and I will leave a link in the description for you to go check out if you're interested.
Yes, we have some exciting things going on over there. You can go check out the different tiers in that, but I'm very excited to announce that I have started writing my book, and under one of those tiers, we will be uploading a page per week to kind of share a rough draft of how that's coming along.
Yep, lots of good stuff. Today we're back with Secrets of Polygamy. Episode 8 with the title Secret Militia, which is very intriguing automatically to us because both of our histories, both with the mainstream LDS church, has a long-standing history of having militia, even though it doesn't currently, as well as the FLDS.
Oh, yes. There's a lot of different ties that are similar with the way I was raised in the FLDS and the secret militia that they call it. I feel like from both of our groups have something that was never called. Well, I guess there was the so-called Mormon militia, which is similar, I guess. But we'll get into why all of them have that and why they think that it's important within those groups. Yeah. In this episode, they're actually kind of shifting gears. We've talked about the FLDS and the Secrets of Polygamy, a lot of episodes recently on the Kingston group. And this one is on the Apostolic United Brethren, or the AUB, which is the same group that the Brown family's from Sister Wives, the same group that Addie McCall, that we've done an interview with. What her group is, it was formed in the 1950s. And then we had also talked about Rule and Allred. Their very first prophet was assassinated by the LeBaron group, which we've also covered.
Right. So there's lots of ties to this AUB, but I'd say this is the first documentary that we've watched that specifically talked about them.
Right.
Although in this episode, I kind of felt frustrated at the interviewers and the producers in the way they were going about this a little bit. So I spent a lot of this episode a little frustrated.
It was very interesting, but also very frustrating in some cases because it seemed that they were grasping at straws.
Yeah. Definitely. So the AUB had this group called the Priesthood Protection Team. Okay. And they said that the AUB is going to need to protect themselves in the future. Now, this comes from clear back in the day with the LDS, which I talked about later in the episode, but I just want to bring up now the fact that the LDS has a history of having a militia. There were... Right in the beginning times of Joseph Smith, there was a lot of persecution when they moved to Missouri for a while, long while, from like 1887 to 1976. There was a shoot to kill order on Mormons in Missouri. And
that was based particularly on their belief of plural marriage and some of the illegal things that they were doing during that time that caused that order to be put out on them, which of course is crazy, right? That was even a thing, but yeah, and it lasted for a very long time. I didn't realize how long that order remained in effect.
And I don't believe, people weren't getting shot, Mormons weren't getting shot down in the street clear until 1976. It just took that long before their government said, we need to get rid of this law from forever ago. So it's not like they've been being killed like that for that long. But in 1838, the Hans Mill Massacre, men, women, and children, Mormons 17 people were killed. And it was a huge reason of this idea of that if people are going to be against the Mormons, they need to be able to protect themselves. So the Mormon militia, I believe it was the Nauvoo Legion also was a militia in Nauvoo. So it's very common in LDS history, the idea that we're going to be persecuted by the government, by other people, and so you need to be able to protect yourself,
right? And that's kind
your
of
families.
Exactly. That's where it all came from, and that's the way it was in the FLDS as well. Is if people come against us and they're trying to harm us, then we need to be prepared. That's kind of what it came down to. Now, in our day and age, at least speaking from my personal experience within the FLDS, it was more about let's scare people. If people are coming to us or coming at us, let's have scare tactics. And that was some of the God Squad was one of the things that people talk about where the trucks would drive around the FLDS community and scare people out. I'm very much aware of that and was a part of it in some cases. But it was more about scare tactics and scaring people to make people think that if you don't leave us alone, there could be consequences. At least that was the feeling that I had.
Yeah, and then there's the other side. I mean, bodyguards. Now that's typical of, I believe, all prophets. Even the LDS prophet definitely has bodyguards. You won't notice them as much, but there's definitely security, right? And I think that that's common for
with any well-known person.
Any well-known person or very high-up person in any church or organization. That's going to happen. Joseph Smith had a bodyguard himself.
Oh, yeah.
So very, very common as far as that goes. The other side, not just the in smaller secretive groups trying to keep people out, is also the idea that the end of the world is coming and that it's supposed to be upon us soon. So what kind of things, and this doesn't even just apply to Mormonism, but any type of preppers or people who believe that they're going to need to fend for themselves, that when the second coming comes, you need to be able to protect yourself with, most of the time it ends up being with guns, you need to protect yourself, you need to protect your family, food storage, emergency medical, in case you couldn't get to a hospital, all those type of things. I'm only prefacing, I know it's a long preface, but there's a huge history of all of these type of things. So the idea that the AUB had one of these groups is not out of the ordinary within Mormonism. And the mainstream LDS church does not have a militia currently. Want to clarify that. As they've become more a part of regular society and is no longer shunned in society, they were able to drop that militia. And the mainstream LDS church has conformed to society in a lot of ways that have made the fundamentalists not happy, right? And that's why a huge reason why there are so many fundamentalist breakoff groups. They're like, you guys are catering to society over here. We're going to live true to the doctrine. And that's why they still feel that same fear that the original Mormons had.
Yeah, and in early days, the early days of the mainstream LDS church, I guess you can call it, of course, people in the FLDS are going to claim that they're the main people, and all the groups are going to claim that they're the main church, and the other people broke off from them. But in the early days, it was always talked about the destructions and the end of times, and that's where these small groups still hold on to that, like within the FLDS, for example. This episode brought up the Journal of Discourses, which within the FLDS, and I assume within the AUB and the Kingston group and all of the other groups, is one of the main scriptures that talks about very in detail how we should handle certain situations, that what makes us special, polygamy, the end of times, the great destructions, the God's going to come and destroy all the wicked, and that the righteous need to be prepared. That kind of stuff was talked about and ingrained on our minds to the point that we were constantly feeling that tomorrow could be the last day, and not necessarily because the government was going to come take us out, but that God was coming to destroy the wicked. And when that happened, that the wicked would be fleeing to us to try to somehow find protection, and they would try to come in and take over our homes and our belongings because they were trying to be saved from the great destructions. And so we needed to be prepared to protect ourselves from the mobs that would come in and try to take us over. So, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. It wasn't just simply, the government's going to try to come in and kill us and we need to shoot back. That wasn't. The second
coming of Christ itself just comes with a lot of destruction.
Exactly. And so there was a lot of bits and pieces to why it was important. I was a little disturbed and frustrated in the way they went about this episode, trying to make it seem that these churches were just simply trying to, almost just trying to kill people. Like they have their little armies to go out and kill people
cause harm.
Which, and as they even stated, they admitted
multiple times. I think it was 2 or 3 times that they stated what you're going to say.
I think if we're going on the same page here, that this group, this priesthood protection team, never actually harmed anyone.
Has never hurt a single person. Has never ever targeted an organization. And has never done any harm.
Now, I'm not saying that it's okay to have militias, if you want to call them that, in these groups that could potentially cause harm. I'm not saying that's okay. But I would say, because I've seen it, in a lot of small towns and communities, people do that, not completely aside from religion, nothing to do with religious beliefs. These small groups that are out in the middle of nowhere form this bond that, hey, if something comes after us, we're going to protect ourselves, whatever that is.
Yeah, we've known people personally, completely outside of religion, that have been part of small militias for small towns, and they're like, we're ready to protect ourselves if anything bad happens in the world.
Yeah. So I just want to point out that it's not as shocking as they made it out to be. And we even saw that with Sarah when they met with this lady named Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely. And just quickly, I did want to mention Journal of Discourses again, because you were just talking about how that's considered doctrine. Within the LDS has now said, like, that's not LDS doctrine. And they specifically mentioned in this episode, the LDS does not consider it doctrine. They do not endorse it. And they have denounced the racism in it. I thought, it is kind of sad that they have to put those kind of warnings, because that is the stuff, very racist, and very pro-polygamy, pro-end of times.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that you said, like you said, the FLD, it's causing these fundamentalist groups to behave the way they're behaving. A lot of it comes from the Journal of Discourses, which is just a compilation of sermons by early Latter-day Saint teachers and prophets, prophets, apostles, other people, but a lot from Brigham Young, who was a prophet.
Right. Yeah. And that's another thing that is interesting here is, yes, it's easy for the mainstream LDS church to now say, yeah, what crazy scripture. But they still believe in the prophets that wrote these scriptures as prophets.
Well, our university is called Brigham Young University.
Right. So
it's still named after this guy, but we just don't like his sermons anymore.
I've always wondered about that, and I'm not trying to paint the mainstream LDS church in a negative light. I've always been curious, especially coming from the FLDS church, where these sermons from the early day prophets were so important to us, how suddenly they became non-important with the changing of times and all of that. Because that was one of the things the FLDS church would point at the mainstream LDS church and say, they're going astray here because prophets say this. Now they're not believing in what the prophets are saying. And so anyway, that's a tangent that's not that important, but it is interesting to me that things have changed so much depending on which church you belong to.
Yeah. So Sarah, this was the first person that they interviewed about it, and her father was Scott Mingles.
Yeah.
And he was a Green Beret. And their family story was interesting, that her parents, Scott Mingle and his wife, were military family, traveled all over the place, were mainstream LDS. Then they found the Journal of Discourses. And as they were studying early day prophets, they decided that, a polygamous church would be, a fundamentalist church would be the right church. And they went and joined the AUB. And at this time, Sarah's talking about growing up in the AUB. She got married in the AUB at 19. And then her ex-husband was one of the people that her dad ended up training in this priesthood protection team. This was one part in the episode that I was kind of really frustrated, because they were definitely trying to get her to say and admit things that she didn't want to say about it
because
at all.
She didn't think they were truthful.
Yeah, she was like, even at one point, and I even wrote it down, even at one point, she was like, I feel like you're painting this a certain way. And the producer, like, from behind
when the producer jumps in and they're like, she wasn't making it sound spicy enough. She wasn't making it sound spicy enough. She was just saying, oh, this was a thing. Yeah, but they didn't cause any harm. It was just they were preparing for the end of times. And both...
She was like, it's glorified Boy Scouts. Like, they're going out there. They're learning how to shoot. They're learning how to hunt. They're learning emergency prep.
Yeah.
What's the harm?
Yeah. And then the producer jumps in and says... If you don't feel comfortable and you don't want to, basically in a nice way, he says, if you don't want to actually tell us the truth, because we know it's way worse than what you're saying. And she was like, what? Like, she was so confused. She was so taken back by the way they were acting towards her. And I was like, are you kidding me? And the reason it meant so much to me that she stuck to her guns there and just said, no, this is the way it was, is because me coming from the FLDS church, I try to stay very truthful and hey, this is my experience. I know that other people had worse experiences than I did, but this is my story, and nobody's going to come in and try to tell me that it was worse or less worse or whatever you want to say than it actually was. This is just my experience.
Yeah. So, and then when she got flustered, and this is made me mad at Mike Browning.
At Matt.
Matt Browning. it may frustrate him because he's like, this is uncomfortable. You're probably uncomfortable because you didn't know the whole truth.
He's like, let me tell you.
Yeah, this is probably what is making you uncomfortable is because you didn't know fully what was going on. And she was like, no. And I was so proud of her. She was like, no, that's not why I'm uncomfortable. I feel like you're painting it in a different light. I didn't think there was anything wrong with it back then. And I still right now do not think there was anything wrong with what they were doing. Period. And then they like left her finally alone. But I was like, good for her for being willing to say, these guys going and learning how to survive in the woods and learning how to shoot a gun or learning how to do these things. Again, we're not trying to take away from the danger of radicalism because that can happen too. Right. But especially, again, within Mormonism, I'd say even within Utah or Western states, it's very common for people to look how huge Boy Scouts is, right? Like it's very common to learn normal preparedness things. And she stood by the fact as well that they never called it a militia, that it was supposed to be a protection team, protection training, that it was never meant to be a militia. It was just preparedness.
Yeah, and she even said they shut it down once people started calling it a militia, and that they said, well, okay, if that's what people think it is, we're going to shut it down. Now, of course, there's speculation out there that they never shut it down. They just got more secretive. That's not something that we know for sure. Well, actually, Jesse, the man that Matt meets with later, did mention that he was in it after they had claimed that it was shut down.
Yeah, so apparently it was shut down in 2013. He said, you know, when he left in 2017, he said he knew that it was still going. It was just more secretive.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a reason why the word militia, like they were like, oh, why does it matter if the word militia? And it's like, because there's so much negative connotation with that. The idea that a militia somehow is going to like overthrow the government, where again, all of these smaller fundamental, right. It's not about going and shutting down the government. It's about keeping and themselves protected from overreach or anything. So it's interesting. And I know that the entire time Matt was saying he just wants to avoid something like Waco, right? Where there's government and these small groups colliding and it ends up with a ton of death. And we watched Waco.
We did.
And
very sad.
Yeah, so sad to see what happened. And also, there was totally government overreach.
Oh, yes. It could have been handled so much better from both sides, of course. We're not saying it was all the government's fault, but from both sides, I feel like it happens so often where it's not handled properly. Even because we have Waco, and then later on we have the raid on Texas, El Dorado there with the FLDS and how things were handled there and the children and all that, and then big issues that they had there. I think everyone that was involved with that would say it was not handled in the right way from both the government side and the FLDS side, and then same with Waco. So it's very frustrating that I don't know why it seems that if there's even the sense at all that there is something illegal going on, regardless of women and children or who is within the group, it seems that it is a take down the whole group at whatever cost. It seems to be the mentality.
Yeah, it's tough. But every time something like that happens, typically these smaller groups are reminded of, oh, this is why we have to be able to protect ourselves. Because if we don't protect ourselves, X, Y, or Z could happen. And they even mentioned, like Jesse was saying, that he was taught when Warren was arrested and when all the raids were happening on the FLDS and things like that were happening, he said they were taught that that's because that was the apostates being punished for being in the wrong polygamous religion.
Yep. So he was looking at the FLDS as an apostate, or those that had left the truth, and that's why they were being punished for their things. And once again, a testimony of the last days. We're here, and look at this. Now people are being punished for their sins, and all this stuff is happening. And so it's just another one of those things where all of these groups are teaching about the end of times, and they use all of these different instances throughout history of proof that it's coming near.
Yeah, it was, like I said, overall just a very, very interesting episode. A little bit, I don't know. It was a little bit too much with the music and them trying to make it sound like it was this, I don't know. It just, you could feel that something was off. Like they were making it seem like it was more than it actually was. Again, not condoning secrecy or automatic weapons or any of that, or he said bombs, I'm not saying that small groups should be having that and be doing those type of things, but I'm also saying that in the United States of America, normal preparedness and being able to know how to go hunt and live in the woods and have medical emergencies, that's very typical and common. And so to also make it bigger, when this group specifically, they said, has never gone after a group. They have never, like, they kept comparing them to these. I think that was my problem too. They kept comparing them to this group was radicalized and, you know, was stopped before a mass bombing, and this group was radicalized and did this, and this group was radicalized and did that. And they're like, the AUB's group, Priesthood Protection Team, has never once even come out against an organization. They've never harmed a single person or come out against a person. And so it's a tough line when we start trying to draw lines that are what we feel is right instead of what people have the right to do and their freedom in the country.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll just say, based on my personal experience and my personal family within the FLDS, because I know there were lots of FLDS people that had guns. I don't know of any instance personally. I've heard of different rumors and things, but those were rumors that I heard of after I had left the FLDS. But while I was there, I didn't personally know of any human being using a gun of any kind to harm another human being within the FLDS, or an FLDS harming someone on the outside with a gun. That was not something that I ever knew happened. Now, did the bodyguards of Warren Jeffs carry guns? Yes, they did. But there were also FLDS police officers that carried weapons and things. So guns were in the community, but in my family, my father didn't allow us to have guns. He said no. He very much disagreed with the idea of people carrying guns. So just to point out that it wasn't one of those things where the FLDS leaders required that all members had a gun or that were trained with guns and that kind of thing. So, and
that's the same in the AUB. They weren't saying that every single person, it wasn't like the LeBarons where now every member is a militia member, right? And there's these hit lists and there's, you know, all this stuff and everybody's being trained. It was, hey, there's a small group of men. And as they said that it was for protection of the leaders and to be ready in case of government interference.
Right.
So again, where government interference comes in and where that line is can be so tricky. It could be like Waco and be a complete disaster. Hopefully not. But
yeah, I think that what really frustrated us here, and we're not trying to say that every group is worse than the AUB or the AUB is better than any other group out there. All that is frustrating to me is that when people edit certain things in a more dramatic way to make better TV, it was very obvious in this episode that they were trying to make better TV out of a story that was barely even there.
Yeah, that's definitely what it felt like. But if you want to hear more of what it was like for Sam to grow up in polygamy and not be edited out with dramatic music to make it sound like something horrible happened when it didn't, then please like and subscribe.
Yes, thank you all so much for being here with us today. We look forward to talking with you soon.
Talk to y'all soon.